Hello, everybody. So it is August 16th in most parts of the world, and the big summit meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, is now over. As I speak to you, it has happened about it had ended 5-6 hours ago, and I would like to share some first reflections with you on what we saw. The media is, of course, very full of this news at the moment. I would like, though, to point out how when you go to any one of the usual Western media, CNN, New York Times, The Guardian, and so on, what you find at this moment is a prime example of the West's solipsism, of it being completely engulfed in itself and reflecting on nothing but itself. And I think nothing shows that better than the way in which currently the press briefing or the press conference that the two leaders did. You see it better here. Unfolded, where you had under the banner of pursuing peace, and I will talk about this more later. You had both leaders speaking. They didn't take any questions. They just gave their statements and then they left. And how this and the subsequent remarks of Donald Trump then in other shows. He went straight to Sean Hannity and made some more remarks there. How this is currently digested by the Western media, solemnly from the viewpoint of the West, and everybody keeps focusing on what Trump said. Just get this: Trump and Putin skipped Q&A. Okay, fine. But Trump calls Hillary Clinton very nice over Nobel Peace Prize remark. Trump says Putin and Zelensky want him for a joint future meeting. Trump backs off threat of severe consequences. Trump says he and Putin largely agree. I think the meeting was a 10, Trump says. Absolutely amazing to me how currently the West keeps listening. Every single word that Donald Trump says is currently being sucked out and then spread out and ironed out and then explained and discussed and so on. And you really need to dig quite a bit until you find some remarks that Vladimir Putin made, although he actually spoke twice as long as Donald Trump. So first thing to say is the meeting itself, took apparently about 3 hours when they discussed also together with their teams. And there's currently a debate whether that means the meeting was cut short, because apparently the idea was that after the first summit of the leaders together with their teams, the teams then would break out into separate sessions and maybe have detailed talks, but that didn't happen. We yet need to figure out whether this means that overall the meeting was cut short or not. But a 3-hour summit discussion is actually quite substantial for a first meeting, and we also learned through this press conference that both of them actually say that this is the beginning. Especially Vladimir Putin emphasized that he hopes that this is the beginning of the thawing of the relationship and of the betterment of the relationship, even though we do not have now this concrete outcome that especially Donald Trump and the West was hyping up over time, right? The Western media and also the Europeans and so on, they kept pushing that Trump should aim for a ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire. Now, that unconditional ceasefire didn't happen. There's no Russia didn't agree to anything, and actually the two didn't come to a final to an agreement on what should happen next. What Donald Trump then literally said is there's no deal until there's a deal. So he seemed a little bit downbeat, to be honest. He seemed also not exactly to know what to say to the media. His less than 4 minutes of his remarks were full of platitudes and talking about people and the names of his team. So you could see how he was kind of trying to look for something to say to the media, and then he ended it. The whole conference. This is maybe the second thing that was quite extraordinary. It was Vladimir Putin who opened the press conference. He was the first one to speak, and he gave a well thought through, actually short but thought through remarks that I think give a hint at him having prepared a lot of what he would be willing to give. Whereas I think Donald Trump was hoping to achieve more with the meeting, and then probably couldn't use whatever kind of bombastic announcement he wanted to make. Whereas for Vladimir Putin, it seems that not only is he very good at thinking on his feet and like making up very coherent speeches as he goes, but the remarks that he prepared and the story that he outlined, that he had probably outlined beforehand, is something that he was then able to convey. There are people who say that him starting with the conference, although the United States is the host, is highly unusual. It is unusual, and that it sends a weird signal. On the other hand, it actually gives Donald Trump the last word. And you could even see how toward the end Vladimir Putin was interjecting something very interesting when Donald Trump said, we will meet again and we will continue the discussion. Vladimir Putin said in English, next time in Moscow, to which then Donald Trump started smiling and saying like, well, this I will get some heat for that, but I can see it happening. It's quite fascinating to me, because of course Vladimir Putin speaks fluent English. You could also see that in the beginning. A lot about this meeting is very interesting, also from the way that it unfolded, because we know this meeting was prepared for. We know that it was in the talks for several weeks, and we know that there was under the hood like diplomacy going on, and non-public diplomacy that was not washed and laundered in the media, but that there were secret talks. So this meeting has been prepared for many weeks, but the concrete meeting and the concrete spot where it would happen in Anchorage, this was basically done all within 1 week of the announcement. So there was not a lot of time to prepare. And one of the things that happened is that, let me see if I can find it. Here you see a bit of that. Both of these leaders, they arrived with their limousines, of course, with their armored cars, because both had to fly in, right? Trump from Washington and Putin, of course, from Moscow, and they both arrived with their armored cars. But in the end, they took together the car of the U.S. president. So Vladimir Putin got into the car together with Donald Trump, and they got in apparently also without an interpreter, which tells us that they were sharing some thoughts and some exchanges also in English, and again, it is of course a great benefit that Vladimir Putin speaks English and can understand what his counterpart is saying, even without having this mediation of the translator. His press speech, of course, he gave in Russian with then translation. If you want to read the transcript, I posted it on my Substack. You can get it from here and read through it. There was a lot of press present, of course, because for some reason the expectation on the Western part was that maybe there would be now an end to the war. But I find it very telling that the entire meeting happened under the slogan that you see here on the screen. It happened under pursuing peace, not making peace, but pursuing peace. So just like the pursuit of happiness in the US Constitution, this hints at this realization that the thing that is being pursued will, of course, never be perfectly reached, but the pursuit is the best we can do. I find that a very pragmatic way of framing the entire endeavor. So I don't know. This must have been agreed on. I don't think that's such a large thing like the theme of the summit that they then even like put up everywhere behind these two leaders, that was not agreed upon. So this must have been okayed by both sides, and this hints just at this being again part of a process and not the end point. So we are not at a treaty signature point. Rather on the contrary, we are just starting a change of the relationship between the two superpowers, and I think that is the most benign reading that we can have from what happened. We are The Russians didn't give in. The Russians didn't concede to any kind of halt of the special military operation, to giving up any territory. Again, it was discussed that territorial swaps were discussed, but nothing was actually nothing concrete was agreed upon. The Russian leader, Mr. Putin, actually, his speech is so revealing because it just shows in which direction the Russians would like to take this. They would definitely want to push for better relations with the United States and a comprehensive security framework. They want to work on the root causes. Mr. Putin repeated again, as he has done many times, and again, the Western media keeps completely ignoring it. He says we need to address the root causes, and then we need to work on a comprehensive security structure. And he also underlined, of course, this security structure must take into consideration the security needs of Ukraine. He actually said so, and he is back. Interestingly, he's back to the phraseology that Ukraine and Russia are a brotherly people. This brotherly people sentence has been missing from many of these statements that the Russians made about the Ukrainians for a long time, but it is now back. And both leaders actually said that the ending the bloodshed is of course a priority. But overall, you could tell how the Russians, how Mr. Putin just stuck to his narrative that what is needed is a large agreement. And this is also why these two leaders are meeting in the first place, right? This is done without the Europeans and without the Ukrainians because it's not about them in the first place, at least not to the Russians. Maybe it is to the Americans, but the way that we've seen this unfolding from the side of the U.S. president, we can tell that probably also the Americans, they want more. The Trump administration also agrees with Russia that having a working relationship, and Mr. Putin emphasized several times, a business-like relationship. You don't need to be friends, you don't need to be allies, you just need to have a pragmatic way of interacting with each other. Mr. Putin also underlined that the business potential for both countries is quite large right now, that since there's all of these sanctions at the moment and basically so few normal interactions between the two great powers, that if we got back to some form of normalization, you could have a dramatic increase of benefits for both sides. So that's also why he started his speech with recalling the good neighborly relations that they have and the history that they share. I found it quite amazing that Vladimir Putin started with underscoring that the Russia and the United States are neighbors. They're literally neighbors, and that the Bering Strait separates them. Only the Bering Strait separates them, and that there are two islands that are actually only 4 kilometers away from each other, and that the U.S. and Russia are literally the soil is only 4 kilometers apart. And that's how he opened it, and and then also saying that when he arrived, he said like, hello, hello neighbor, good that you're there and that you're alive. Wishing the United States well. Russia, Vladimir Putin really made a point of wishing the United States well, um, and praising also the common past when they fought together in the Second World War and how many things that connects them. So you could really see how Putin again, and this is very characteristic for him, how he tries to underline all of the things that connect these people. He used to do that with the Germans. He spoke in the German Bundestag. He spoke to Angela Merkel. He wrote op-eds in large German newspapers in which he always praised Russian-German relations and where he praised the Germans. It's just the German media and politicians that didn't really reciprocate. And you could tell even now, how the only thing that the Europeans think about is like trash talking and utterly ruining any kind, or trying to ruin even more any kind of possible relationship with Russia. That's what we've seen in the last week, how the Europeans, they got together, and the only thing they agreed upon is how horrible they find Russia, and how they demand from Russia that it pays all of these ridiculous sums of reparation money, and that the common position of the Europeans is that the Russians are to blame for everything. and that nothing good ever came out of Russia. Whereas the Russian leader, when he goes to the United States, with whom they are fighting a proxy war, and Vladimir Putin has said several times, and the Russians have been saying so many times, that this is not primarily a war between Russia and Ukraine. Between Russia and Ukraine, Russia is implementing a military operation. The proxy war is with the United States. And they frame it as a proxy war, right? And still, when the leader of Russia goes to the United States, he says he heaps praise on the US. And also, some people were afraid that Vladimir Putin and his entourage could be murdered in the United States, and that this is just a trap. Decapitation is about to happen, and of course, that's not what occurred. What happened is that you again have a working relationship, and this is already something that is freaking out the neocons. This is already something that the Europeans don't want to see, but it is a reality. And the fact that Vladimir Putin took all of his top staff, including Mr. Lavrov, including Ushakov, his primary advisor, and so on, that he took all of this delegation and went to the United States and met there, also is a first sign, of trust, of trust-building methods, right? Inviting the US president is, of course, more trust-building on the top level to say, like, look, we can visit each other again. And even though we are fighting a proxy war, and we both agree, that Trump agrees too, right? He said so, his administration said so, this is a proxy war. They've admitted to this several times, that they view it in the same terms. Even while fighting a proxy war, we are again at a point where you can do diplomacy together. And this is where we are in this multipolar world, which is again a Clausewitzian world, where you have war, you have violence, and at the same time you have diplomacy, because war is the extension of the continuation of diplomacy by other means, and diplomacy is the continuation of war by other means. So what we are seeing is a return to the balance of power of the 19th century, where everybody agrees, okay, sometimes we've got violence and sometimes we need to talk and we need to pursue our interests however it makes sense. And the Russians are underlining this by actually not having agreed to a ceasefire, continuing on the battlefield, while still then also using talks and diplomacy as a way forward in order to resolve the larger issue. And the larger issue is not who gets to control what plot of land in Ukraine. The larger issue is how to get to a security structure, a mutually beneficial security structure that actually holds up and that takes into considerations everybody's concerns and brings back peace. Therefore, the slogan, pursuing peace. How do we pursue peace? How do we silence the weapons, and how do we keep them silent? So I do interpret this now as the beginning of the understanding that peace is not something that you just sign on a paper. Peace is something that needs to be fostered, and that is part of a process, and that needs to be fostered over time, right? So in this sense, while I think the Americans did enter these negotiations with the hope that they could push the score a victory, and this is also how it's being framed in the media, right? Who scored what victory? They entered with the idea maybe we can score a victory to get some Western interests through. The Russians entered these negotiations with the idea of pushing this process into the right direction without giving up any of their interests. And that, I think, this is actually where they are currently meeting. This is where, although Donald Trump wanted more concrete issues, current issues, he is in agreement that the larger picture of pushing forward is worth going ahead, and is worth also for Vladimir Putin to take not a leap of faith, but to a calculated risk. Going to Alaska is a calculated risk. Again, not for physical safety. People have said, the U.S. Decapitation strikes. Look at Iran. Look at what how they're treating leaders in the Middle East. But we must be aware this is a completely different ball game. This is a completely different level of leadership and of a relationship. Whereas Iran is definitely looked down on. It's definitely the United States does not take them as a peer. It is now clear that Russia, China, those are peers, whether the US and the Europeans like it or not. And actually, the relationship between them is now moving towards this mutual agreement that you are jointly responsible for the pursuit of peace. No power can do it alone, because the other ones can be the other ones are necessary components, not necessarily partners, but components. And one of the interesting things Vladimir Putin said is that he hopes that this message that they together, the two leaders, Washington and Washington and Moscow, are now sending, is being received positively in Europe and in Kiev, in order and will not be sabotaged. So he made a point. Vladimir Putin, in his speech, made a point in saying this is overall positive for a settlement, and will bring us forward. And he hopes that in Europe and in Ukraine, it will be perceived positively. So, in terms of olive branches and reconciliatory rhetoric, the Russian president really went as he could to also signal to the people who got skipped, because the Europeans and Ukrainians were clearly skipped, right? They were left out of the picture, and this is what infuriated them so much, and that's why the Europeans kept repeating, like, no settlement about Ukraine without Ukraine, and blah 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 BS like that. And they went on a temper tantrum, even demanding again reparations, and demanding a complete withdrawal of Russian forces, and territorial integrity and NATO membership for Ukraine. So basically demanding what the victor of this war gets to demand, while being the loser. And it's clear, even Viktor Orban now said so. Ukraine is not only losing the war, Ukraine already lost the war. And despite that circumstance, the Europeans still pretend that they have the standing of demanding something as the losers of this entire affair. Now, it's of course utterly ridiculous, but and Vladimir Putin, I think, alluded to that, they can still be spoilers. Although they cannot alter overall the direction of the process, as the two great powers are now setting it up. They cannot change the way of the track, at least not for now. They would still be able to derail what's happening on the track, if they really put their minds to it, by, let's say, terrorist attacks, or by escalations with the drones, or these weapons that are still that they do possess. I mean, there is the potential of creating significant hurt, if they put their mind to it, by attacking civilian infrastructure, whatnot. I mean, something that would be so outrageous that Russia would have to react in a way that then would again sabotage this entire affair. Vladimir Putin also made it clear that he does blame the United States for some things. He put it into very diplomatic language. He actually was talking about Donald Trump's predecessor, whom he reminded in 2022, and I suppose that was an exchange. Probably the exchange, at the end of 2021, early 2022. He said 2022, so it was probably in January or early February, when must have been some exchange with the predecessor of Mr. Trump, so Mr. Biden, of course, to whom he said that the relationship between Russia should not be one based on military escalation, and that Vladimir Putin does agree with Trump's statement that had he been president, this war would never have happened. He says he agrees that this would probably have been the case. So he does thereby implicitly blame the US, blame the previous administration, blame Joe Biden for having selected the course of militarily fighting it out. This is, of course, what analysts here, I and others, Glenn Deason and the people from Iran, so on and so forth, have been saying for a long time. This is the most provoked war in the history of provoked wars, and we have books now with these titles. And that in the end, when push came to shove in February, it was the Western side, it was the NATO side that escalated this affair, also with the increased attacks in the Donbass. The OSCE reported escalations, and that at that point it was then this decision of it was the decision of the United States that then pushed the Russia to try to scare Ukraine militarily into making a deal, which almost succeeded, didn't, and then they had to withdraw, and it took a long time, and then you went into this attrition warfare, and all of this is out now, and Mr. Putin also said so in different speeches that the initial idea of the special military operation was just to militarily coerce Kiev into an agreement, and that this then failed, right? So you then went into a different process, the horrible process that now they are trying to end. So then, he ended his speech on this, or toward the end of the speech, he also emphasizes that it is now time to turn the page, and that this current meeting is the beginning, hopefully, of turning the page. And this is then where, again, in Russia, I'm pretty sure people will discuss very much whether Vladimir Putin is way too optimistic, whether he is, again, being Mr. Nice Guy who is again falling for a trap. And I know Blind Balletic and others, they still interpret this as a trap, as a way to dissuade Russia from actually winning on the battlefield. I do think we now have the conclusion that that's not the case. Russia will continue with the military means, but it will also use diplomatic means, and we are moving toward a situation in which, unfortunately, violence, even between great powers, is now just another part of the relationship that these powers have. And we will see how far Donald Trump will be able to push this. He is now going to talk to the Europeans, and certainly Vladimir Putin is already talked to the Chinese. We are seeing here how the new multipolar order is going to be structured, and that it is going to be a multi-layered relationship. So a military confrontation, diplomatic confrontation, economic confrontation, but, and I think this is the hope, managed confrontation, managed conflict to some extent. And this meeting here was part of the attempt at downscaling the level of violence of the relationship, and an improvement, and therefore the pursuit of more peace. Although you will never completely reach this end state, but maybe we can get to a point where we are below outright violence, right? Large scale mass violence. So I think it's a great mistake that the Western media is not focusing on the words of Mr. Putin, because again, Mr. Trump's words are relatively banal, relatively little of substance. You can read it in my Substack. He was over very quickly, but still the Western media keeps focusing solemnly on what he said in order to kind of use the crystal ball, read in the crystal ball like where Trump wants to take this. But again, this is because Western media is so single-mindedly, solipsistically obsessed with itself, with the West, and with Trump, that they completely forget that the other part that then defines or co-shapes, creates the process, that one also should be properly analyzed. And it's also part, of course, of the demonization of the Russians, that nothing good ever came out of Russia. Therefore, why listen to the Russians? Now, those are my first impressions. There will be more. There will be a talk with Glenn Deason pretty soon on this channel. I hope you're looking forward to that. We will discuss more of these, of what we can learn from the meeting. See you next time.